Kids have dreams. Their dreams are like everyone else's dreams. First, when you're a baby, you want to be Superman. Then you dream you want to have a big house and travel, take care of yourself and your family and have money. You don't want to be poor. We have to imagine something different, to have a radical imagination, to think about a place that's different than the one you've been forced to be in.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us tonight for a special celebration of Mayor Ras Baraka's new Audible book, The Book of Baraka, that's now available on Audible. My name is Lawal. I'm the CEO and founder of Ellen Company and HBCU Buzz, and today I'm moderating this perfect roundtable. And before we dive into the great speakers we have here for you today, I want to introduce the man of the hour, Mayor Baraka. Please join us, introduce yourself, and let us know why you're here today.
Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. I am Mayor of the City of Newark, partnered with Audible to create an Audible original called The Book of Baraka, which is made up of poetry, music, myself, my good friend and college buddy, Jelani Cobb, who is a staff writer at the New Yorker. And we just talked about my family's development here in the city of Newark and my movement from activist to poet to the mayor of the city.
And it's funny because I was on your website, and the first thing that popped out to me is when I become mayor, we become mayor. So yeah. I just love that.
Yeah, that was when we first started, and it came out of a speech that I was giving to campaign volunteers. And they coined it. I said it. They said, we're going to say this over and over again, because it really was appealing to the idea that I'm from Newark, born and raised, the good and the bad. And, the things that we're going to do in this city are basically going to be reflective of my coming up and coming of age in the city of Newark and making sure that we take care of the residents and the families of our city.
You've been killing it. Dr. Brittney Cooper.
Hi there. I am a professor at Rutgers University, the New Brunswick campus, so right down the road from Newark, and also a writer and a proud Howard University alumna, just like Mayor Baraka. I'm glad to be with all of you.
Brea Baker.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brea Baker. I'm an activist and a writer and a member of Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. I am so excited to be joining y'all and to be talking about the brilliant work of you, Mayor Baraka, but also of the cultural movement that we're in.
Shabazz.
Hello, I am Ilyasah Shabazz. I'm a college professor. I am an author. I am an activist. I am a producer. And most importantly, I am a supporter of the Baraka family. It's such an honor for me to be here. I also represent Delta Sigma Theta sorority. And it's an honor for me to be here on this panel with these esteemed guests.
I just realized that I didn't let y'all know that I'm a lifetime member of the greatest fraternity on the planet. And it's funny because maybe I should have said this last, but Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. And I realized some of you guys didn't share your fraternities and sororities. So Mayor, you want to let us know?
Well, it should be clear for folks who don't. It's right there. The oldest and the first, 1906, Alpha Phi Fraternity Incorporated.
Skeet Phi.
There it is, first fam.
Okay, last but not least, Jamila Mustafa.
Hey, welcome everyone. I am Jamila Mustafa, journalist, TV host, and actress. I'm a former Miss Delaware State University and founder of HBCU to Hollywood. You guys can currently catch me on MTV Networks, hosting Fresh Out Live, SiriusXM, Jamila's Jams, and so much more. But I am honored to be here virtually with everyone and super excited because today's chat is going to be lit.
I love it.
Definitely. Talk about intros. And it's funny because, everyone on this call inspires me. I love all the work everyone's doing. I'm stalking you guys. I mean, the work is great. And it's fun because even when I got a chance to preview your book, man, I also started to look at some of the activism work that you've been doing around cannabis and everything you've been doing in Newark. So like, hats off. And I want to ask the rest of the panel to kind of just tell me your thoughts on the book, tell me your thoughts on the legacy of the Baraka family, and like, let's just dive into it. Who's first? Jamila, I'm picking on you because I love your smile, so let's get it.
Well, listen, we're going to talk a little bit more, overall, but I think one word to kind of just sum up the Baraka legacy and the family is just iconic. When you talk about art, when you talk about movement, when you talk about Black excellence, when you talk about putting African Americans at the forefront of creating, they are the representation of the phrase "for us, by us." I know that's FUBU, but from everything from political to art, I just think, and especially at HBCU, the influence that they left way after the movement and the civil rights and the Black Panther Party. But I mean, when you talk about, Mayor Baraka, his father, his legacy, I mean, the imprint is why we're here today, generations later, between college, no matter what, their imprint is in the world. So I think, to pretty much sum it up, they are the reason why we're having this talk. The legacy is undeniable and indisputable.
Absolutely.
And as far as, look, I don't want to give out too many nuggets, because everyone watching this, and not for our panelists, but for our viewers, they need to read. They need to listen to this. So I'm not going to give out any spoilers here today. You got to dive into it yourself.
Brittney, Bree, what you think?
Yeah, the thing that I want to say is that, having gone to Howard, there are names that you hear when you arrive on campus at Howard. And I didn't arrive there till 1998. But, we still knew Ras Baraka's name when we got to Howard because of the legacy that he left in that space. He was a student leader. And even in the fall of 2021, when Howard University had these historic protests, in the HBCU networks, the Howard networks, we knew that Mayor Baraka was headed down to the campus to meet with the students, to help them to make sense of their moment. But what it reminds me of is that my first time meeting Mayor Baraka was actually at a books and breakfast event in Newark in the aftermath of Ferguson. And so we were trying to take this model from the 60s of organizing in community by reading Black books to Black kids and providing a bit of breakfast. And so we're just chilling in this space in Newark, and in walks Mayor Baraka. And it wasn't a huge community event, and he came in real low key. And that, told me a lot about his commitments, the kinds of things he believes in. And it allowed me to sort of situate him within the legacy that any of us who has been taught well knows. We grew up, and came through Howard reading and listening to Amiri Baraka and his prodigious legacy. And I'm a fan basically of the whole Baraka Jones family. Kelly Jones is an academic. It's, Mayor Baraka's sister I look up to. Lisa Jones, I grew up reading her essays, and now I'm an essayist. And so his entire family is Black royalty, and they have shaped an entire generation of Black possibility in both the creative arts, in the academic world, in terms of how we think about our own pride and our Blackness. And certainly I think that one of the things that really matters and why we should be listening to Mayor Baraka is that our people really struggle to trust politicians, to really trust the people who lead us, because very often they don't love us. They want clout. And what when you've interacted with Mayor Baraka or just seen how he moves is that he doesn't do it for clout. He thinks that good government can help the people. And I think that that's a powerful idea in this moment.
I love that so much. I just want to jump in right after you, Dr. Cooper, because I think the other thing that I love about you, Mayor Baraka, but also about this Audible book is two things. One is that you don't settle for the legacy that you were given. And I think that's important. I think a lot of people are sort of like, oh, I stand on the shoulders of my ancestors, and they're comfortable standing right there. Mm-hmm. And what we've seen is you build upon that bedrock and build upon that foundation, which is so critical. But also this idea of you being so multidimensional. I think there's also a lot of young Black people coming up, especially in our HBCUs and D9 organizations, who feel like they can only be one thing or another. They feel like they have to be pigeonholed into one thing. And what's really powerful is to see your ascension from spoken word artist to principal and educator to this mayoral position, and to know that it's really truly just the beginning and there's so much more in store for you. I think it gives the rest of us permission to also step out of the boxes that people try to put us in, and also recognizing that it makes you show up as a more powerful political leader because, one, you are more relatable and people can see themselves in your story, but two, you love us because you are us. And I think that's really powerful, and I'm excited for audiences to really hear that from you directly.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I echo everything you said. I mean, to be honest, Brittney, it's funny because when you had said something about clout chasing, right? Me and my mom went to Howard. She's a Howard grad, and we argue about this all the time about whether D9 organizations still should exist and the value of our fraternities and like just the differences, because like I have a full staff of like Gen Zers and we argue, we debate things every day. So, and that brings me to my next question, where I'm curious, like, what do you guys see the commonalities and differences between the Black art movements in the 60s and 70s compared to the cultural and artistic movement of today? Anyone wants to jump in on that one?
I have some thoughts on this, but I know Dr. Shabazz, you might have to leave earlier.
Right, go right ahead.
No, please.
You please, I'm deferring to you. Go right ahead.
Well, I think there are so many similarities that I think are really beautiful things that we've learned from the movements in the past and we've built upon. I think in general, we're realizing that art has a power to be both a reflection of the injustice that we're seeing, but not just commenting, but also really building a vision for what we do want to see in the future. I think that's really beautiful, and something we see in film and television and music and spoken word poetry and literature. I think that's really phenomenal. I think the difference that I'm seeing is, unfortunately, there's a bit more individualism that I found. I am lucky enough to be mentored by Carmen Perez, who is mentored by Mr. Harry Belafonte. I'm on the board of his organization, the Gathering for Justice. And he always says artists are the gatekeepers of truth. And in his day, that was a real mandate. That was, if Dr. King is telling me pull up with some money because we got to do this, we got to do that. And if what that means is we have to get together and silence the ego in us that wants to be at the center of it, then we have to do that. And unfortunately, I see a lot of artists who are commenting on the times that we're in and have really beautiful platforms, but are okay with building up their own wealth and that being enough. And there's a lot of talk of Black excellence being enough, right? Black billionaires being enough. And I don't see that same critique that we saw in a Paul Robeson, that same Tony Cade Bambara, who said the role of the artist to make revolution irresistible. And unfortunately, I see a lot of people who are saying all the right things, but they're not talking that talk and walking that walk when it comes to where they're putting their own wealth and how they are, who they're aligning themselves with. And so I think it's important for us to remember that commenting on the times is not enough. We have to also critique them and be willing to build something else up and not become so intertwined with the powers that be and our oppressors that we can't differentiate who is the enemy and who is our ally in this fight.
My Lord.
Agreed. Is anybody else want to chime in on that?
One of the things that, no, please.
No, go ahead, Brittney, please.
Well, the thing I was thinking about was that, we also have artists, who are trying to do this work. And so one of the books that I read recently that I really loved is Professor Shabazz's Betty Before X. I got that book at a Black-owned bookstore in Philly. And, for this, so for this work that we're trying to do for Black girls to help them to see themselves and understand themselves, that book really meant something to me as a person who was always trying to think about how do you make revolution? How do you make leadership? How do you make activism make sense for newer generations of folks? And this is this point I'm making about, Mayor Baraka showing up to a Books and Breakfast event. It isn't just about what we're producing out in the world. It's about what kind of community conversations are we making possible. It's what kinds of possibility are we making possible. And so I think that all of us also really see ourselves as being like in the legacy of those movements. Because look, as a Black feminist scholar, I have all the critiques of, both respect for Mayor Baraka and also critiques of cultural nationalism. It wasn't always super friendly to Black women, certainly not Black women who showed up in the way that loudmouths like me like to show up in the world. And so even to Brea's point about what it means to like not just stand in a place, but also to try to build new possibility, what most excites me is the way that people are trying to remix the legacy of the cultural nationalist era, the way that folks, we're deep, we're in late capitalism. People are getting a lot of stuff tangled up with capitalism. But here's the thing, they also got it tangled up in the 60s, right? Richard Nixon, came through Black communities and talked about, elevating Black business as a pathway to Black freedom. And a lot of our folks sort of got on board with that. It wasn't a particularly pure moment. It's not a pure moment now. And at the same time, though, I do think that the way that we're thinking about gender, the way that we're thinking about sort of community organization, those things excite me. I don't think we're getting it perfectly right, but I do think that we're getting some things right, more right than even our ancestors got it. And I think that that's something to be excited about.
Yeah, I would say that is the goal of it. And I think the underlining message that I took from what Brittney and Brea was saying to me, first of all, in order to build on something, you actually have to know about it, right? So you have to read and study this stuff, and a lot of times we refuse to do that. We just take what people tell us and sound bites and titles, and we run with these things, and we think we know stuff that we really don't know, and so we make similar mistakes. But I think it's important for us not to just praise what happened, but to critique it. It's important for us to analyze what happened, so we don't make these same mistakes. And to critique and analyze don't mean you're against things, right? It just means that you're trying to perfect them or move better than the folks. And that's what you're actually supposed to be doing, to move. You're not supposed to recreate what happened. You're supposed to do better than what folks were able to do before you, given the resources and opportunity that you have. And plus you have the information that they're giving you based on their experience. And you take that and build further on what it is that you have to do. Because there'll be people who come after you who are expecting the same from you, who need to do the same based on the mistakes that you make. And it's clear. Like, I could talk to my mother now about things that happened in the 60s and the 70s, and her point of view is entirely different today than it was in 1964, 1965. Right? Because she learned from her experience. And we have to do that. If we can't learn from the experiences of others, then we put ourselves in a hole that'd be difficult to dig out of.
I completely agree. And I think the best way to do that, and I think that chimes into our next question, the best way to do that is effective storytelling. In your book, you touch on that so many different ways. I mean, the book itself is a great way to look at how we can effectively get our message out there and how we can, share that and how our voice has value. So I think I want you guys to talk to me a little bit about the power of storytelling and how it's played in our specific movement. And if you want to just kind of like give me specific examples of how you've seen it play out and how the storytelling has affected how we think and how we've effectively moved culture and how we basically form our different ways to affect justice. So like, if you can kind of like talk a little bit about that, Shabazz, you want to start with that one? Or I know I'm picking on you again.
Say that, it's absolutely necessary for us to participate in the narrative and not rely on someone else, to control or to determine who we were or what we've been. And even when we think in terms of the enslavement of our ancestors, for example, if we leave it to someone else, the story is that they were slaves, right? When we participate in the narrative, we understand that they were trafficked. We understand the significant contributions of first world nations, right? That these people were trafficked, that they were held in captivity. And had it not been for all that they contributed in spite of their captivity, that not one of us today would have the opportunity of calling the United States of America our home. And so we owe it to our ancestors. We stand on their shoulders. And all of this stuff is extremely important. I could never emphasize enough the importance and necessity of controlling the narrative ourselves, especially when when we think in terms of our foreparents, and when we think in terms of current generations, and when we think in terms of future generations.
Absolutely.
Agreed. I'm definitely going to open the floor for you guys to kind of chime in on storytelling. But I was just going to say, when I started HBC Buzz and I was an undergrad, this is why I started HBC Buzz. Just trying to create the narrative, make sure that students can kind of see positive images of what's actually going on campus. Because if you leave it up to the media, all you see is the bad news. All you see is, HBCU grads are killing each other, students are killing each other on campus, and they're constantly protesting. So I think I get the storytelling, and I understand that just positive imagery and understanding what's actually happening helps a lot. Anyone else want to talk about storytelling a little bit?
I would love to jump in there. I think one part of storytelling is oral. I think that's anything. That's, who started this? Who discovered this? How did we get here? Who created this? It's all stories, whether you're reading it, you're hearing it, you're seeing it. And when you talk specifically about the relationship between storytelling, art, and HBCUs, as they say, one phrase I always heard is a photo speaks 1,000 words. Sometimes if I show you something, like you said, Luke, the importance of imagery. So you have to take a look at, even prior to the Black arts movement, one of the most prominent Harlem Renaissance figures was Aaron Douglas. And when you talk about what he founded at Fisk University and imagery, taking a look at the symbolic Negro history, he was dubbed the father of African-American art. And so those students at Fisk, we're talking about years, generations later, you're still seeing that. Those archaic, those archaic photos, those original creators, you have to see it. You have to see the pain. And then students may say, well, what is this? Or how did this become? So it's one thing to tell the story, but you have to leave your mark. And I think that's the biggest thing, because sometimes, you have to put action behind words. I can tell you something, but I can show you better. And my dad would always say, especially, I went to an art school, and he was, we were trained and we knew about the Black Panther Party movement. And when you talk about the free breakfast program and what that was able to do. And my dad would always have, we'll learn all these things. And I would get so excited to go to school. And I remember sometimes I would tell them what I knew and they would say, you were wrong. And I didn't know how to come back, because the teacher's telling you you're wrong. I'm like, no, I'm right. I heard that from my dad. And my dad would give me the book. And he would say, go in there with that tomorrow. You can't deny what's physically in front of you, and storytelling. And so I think any art form, when you take a look at HBCU, specifically when it comes to storytelling, when it comes to art, when it comes to legacy, we still, some people say, oh, HBCUs are old, they're old fashioned, we got to get it updated. But you got to understand it's the essence of history, and you have to hold on fast to history, just like Langston Hughes says, hold on fast to your dreams. So I definitely think storytelling and art, and we're becoming more bold, we're becoming more aggressive in our delivery. And like I say, this is a generation of disruptive innovators, and we're coming out and we're backing it with facts. This ain't make believe. This is all facts, and it's just given to us in a new vibe, a new era, and a new generation.
Whew. Oh my gosh. Yes to that. Especially what you were saying about oral storytelling too. I'm the child of preachers. And so that is definitely something that has been hammered into me, is that any good sermon begins with a good story. And then you get to your moral and your scripture and whatever it is that you're trying to do. And so regardless of your religious background, I think it's important to realize that, to your point, facts are really critical, but facts without that story, without that thing that really absorbs you into who you're talking about and why you're talking about them to begin with, is so important. And that's what I love about the current iterations of storytelling that we're seeing. We have some really beautiful Black creatives who are making TV shows and films that make us feel affirmed. We have so many brilliant Black authors who are writing books that make it so much easier for us to then go and have those conversations. And I'll say I use storytelling as a cheat code. When I'm online and the trolls are in the comments section, oh, what are you talking about? It's like, okay, read this first, then come back to me and let's continue the conversation. And if you're not willing to read that, then I know that you're not serious about this conversation, and I'm not going to waste any more time. But if you are someone who really just doesn't know and wants to know, I'm going to let you start there, because it's all been said before. And I'm not going to continue to try and reinvent the wheel, or as a poet said, I refuse to spend my whole life explaining white supremacy to itself. It has already been done. And I am not going to continue to hammer that in. We just going to let what exists stand and let that be what it is, but build new stories that speak for us. And I think that's another beautiful thing as a queer Black woman, to know that there are new stories being told about the Black community that are not the same ones that we had been told before. And so that's where we can find that newness and tell something different. But there's so much out there already that, to your point, Jamila, I'm just like, yeah, let me give you 10 book recommendations, 5 documentaries to read. As a matter of fact, like, I have a whole starter pack for people, you know what I'm saying? And I think it's important to be armed with that information.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to close this subject. I know we got to move on. I just want you guys to tell me specific examples of art that has created imaginary possibilities around the subject, and just making sure we're pushing culture forward. And it's funny because when I think of this, my first thing that comes to my mind is like Get Out and Jordan Peele and everything he's doing, right? I remember all the conversations where I had to explain to people what the sunken place was. Just starting there, right? For me, it was just huge because people were just asking, like, wow, that's a thing. What does that even mean? Like, I don't understand that. So can you like just give me examples of art where, you know, we've taken people's imagination and forced conversations that were very specific and tough?
You know, one of the things that I think, I mean, the history, Black folks have been making art forever, right? We were the first artist, and certainly, I mean, we made art even when we couldn't talk. Even, you know, we made art out of the gardens that we made. We made food into an art, and so I think that we have to have a very creative sort of understanding of that. Audre Lorde famously said, "Poetry is not a luxury," right? It is we wake up as poets trying to make sense of our experience. You know, I'm more of a pop culture critic in this contemporary moment. And one of the things that I like to remind audiences of is, you know, I am 40, which means that I grew up as a kid in the 80s and 90s in this country, which was like the golden era of Black TV.
I'm jealous.
I mean, yeah, it was real good. It was real good. But here's the thing. We're in a really good moment now, too. But the thing that I learned having lived through seeing Black folks on TV and then coming through the early part of the 2000s where all of a sudden we weren't on TV in the same ways, there were these limited representations in the early part of the 21st century, was that it is not a bygone conclusion that just because we have come through and we have carved pathways that we will always be there. There is a way that corporations like to traffic in Blackness and like to use us as a fad to build up their cultural capital and things like that. And then once they do it, then they do this thing where they mainstream and they take up shows about us off the air because now they've made money off of our story. So what I love about this moment where there are so many Black female leads on television, and let me offer one additional point about that. When Scandal debuted in 2012, that was the first time we'd had a Black female lead in primetime in 40 years, which is to say the first time that folks in my generation had ever seen that in their lifetime. We're only in 2022. We're only a decade in to seeing Black female leads in primetime television. We haven't been at this for very long. Right. And so the way that Black folks have like exploded onto the art scene, whether you're talking about folks like Issa Rae or Jordan Peele or my fave, Ava DuVernay, like, you know, and of course, Shonda Rhimes, right, who is the bossest of the chicks out here. That's all new. We haven't been doing it that long. And I'm saying that to say, so we can't take it for granted. It's like there was a bat signal that went out in 2012, right? The second part of the Obama, the second term of the Obama administration has said, go. And I feel like all the Black creators were like, this is the time, right? And we didn't just go by making art. We've done that before. We were like, we want the deals. We want to control production. We want to have our own studios. We want to control the means of production so that when y'all inevitably decide that you are tired of us, you cannot do away with us. And the wonderful thing about that in this moment is that the backlash has already begun. This is why you have white parents all over the country coming after critical race theory. They are, literally trying to crush all evidence of the diversity that we've seen in the 21st century. And the only people who are winning that war right now, we're not winning it politically, quite frankly, but where we are winning it is in the art. Where we are winning it is with creatives in all of these places, continuing to disrupt these narratives about who Black people are and represent us with complexity. And that makes me super, super excited. And that's also why you need to buy all the Black books that you can, because publishing houses are like, we trying to hear these Black stories. This is why you need the Book of Baraka. This is why you need to see that we are part of a long Black freedom struggle. And what I love about this book, right, is that it shows us that the freedom struggle didn't stop in the 60s. It didn't stop in the 90s. It didn't stop in 2020. It is ongoing. And our job is to actually now write a worthy chapter to be included in the book. We get to be part of an ongoing conversation that our ancestors have been struggling for, which means that, yeah, we mad that it's taking this long and it's going to take longer, but we're also buoyed by the fact that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, because we have folks who are with us and who have laid pathways and groundwork. And even if we don't choose their pathways anymore, what we can choose is to keep their energy, which is first and foremost, resist, 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 get free or die trying.
I mean, I'm just looking for my purse. Like, are you collecting an offering or something?
Right. I'm like, how do I even talk after that? Like, I'm just sitting here like, wow.
I'm just trying to keep up. I mean, look at
right? You setting the tone for it. But before we shift out of this conversation, I did want to also offer, I think one of my favorite Black artists who I think helps us reimagine is Toni Morrison, the late great. And what I loved is that she was insistent upon writing about Black people exclusively. And at every step of the way, when the New York Times was telling her, I think you're pigeonholing yourself and you could be a great American author if you wrote about other people. And she said, no, I'm going to be a great American author by writing about my people. And I loved that intention, and that it wasn't ever that we were getting the same story over and over from Miss Morrison. We were getting something fresh. And not only was she writing her own stories, but then she had the foresight to say, no, now I got to go over there and edit Miss Angela Davis's autobiography. I got to go here and bring other people to the table. And so I just love the example that she set, and how her works help us both critique the past, but also envision a different future as well.
Thank you. I mean, I definitely think they should read more of that. I mean, but to be honest, as we're switching to leadership and community, I just want to take a moment to thank the mayor and thank all the stuff that he's done and his commitment to our community. And I just want us to talk a little bit about the struggle and you guys' experience and why and how and what you guys have done to be effective leaders, and why. I just want to know your why, because, doing the work is hard. And becoming community leaders and doing what you love to do and creating art and telling stories is part of your community involvement. So if you can tell me what inspired you to become community leaders and why that's so important in our culture today. I want to start with you, Mayor.
Well, I feel like I didn't have a choice. It just, I grew up in that situation, and I'm saying just because you grew up in it, it means that that's going to happen, because I was friends with families and kids who grew up in the same environment and place that I grew up with, and they went in a different way. I mean, it was a difficult period. I mean, a lot of times we romanticize what went on, but it was very dangerous times, and families were literally targeted, destroyed, torn apart, and there's a lot of resentment even from people my age, kids who grew up in the movement for the most part, because we didn't have access to the things that we thought was the thing everybody had access to in America, right? We wanted to have the parties and celebrate Christmas and have the same names and all that other kind of stuff, but we just didn't do that. And so I felt an urge, growing up in my house to do something different than what was happening. And then when I went to Howard, it just exploded, exploded in my brain, all around me. It felt like this is exactly what I needed to be doing. It was inevitable that I would get myself on this course, in this journey. And so I began it. I stopped resisting it. I stopped running away from it. I embraced it and fell into it and said, this is what I'm going to be doing. I need to get back to Newark quickly and begin, helping other people find out who they are and make their way, in this place. and help us transform specifically a place that had more of us on the bus to prison than on the train to the university was my initial kind of motivation. Because when I was going to Howard, some of my best friends were taking public transportation to turn themselves into Annandale, you know, and I was on my way to Washington, D.C. And I thought that I wanted to disrupt that in some kind of way. And I think that was my first idea in my head of what I needed to do to begin to change the environment that I was in, which helped me study and learn more while I was at the university. And I think it was natural for me because when I began to read and study, it felt normal because I grew up in this. It reminded me of places I've been, people I've seen, books I've read, words I've heard before. So
wonderful. Anyone else want to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny that Mayor said that you didn't have a choice, but you know, it's a joke, but it's also serious when you understand a bloodline. You know, when you talk about a bloodline and you talk about history, when you really got to get down to it, you can't play with it. You know, you can't say at age 54, at age 27, once I get my degree, once I get my paycheck, once I get this, then I'm gonna go back and help. When it's in your bloodline, it's in who you are. It's just surroundings. I know for me, you know, I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware. We were right there. We were next door, about 25 minutes, 30 minutes out from Philly. But we didn't have a television station. We didn't have, you talk about visual representation. We didn't have that. We didn't have really radio. And so for us, you know, and it was a high level of violence in Wilmington, Delaware. And so for me, the two things that I had to decide early, and my father, you know, he served, you know, that was what he did, you know, community outreach, community involvement, martial arts, a way to defend ourselves, mind, body, and soul. You know, that's your foundation. And so when I began to get into pageantry, activism, television, that's what I have to focus on. What is your representation? What is going to be your legacy? And how are you going to drop seeds of who you are and where you came from in your history? Because you have to be strategic. Just like the mainstream media is strategic, we have to be strategic in how we implement our history and understand that even though everything is fun, it still has to have a message. And so, you know, when I went to Delaware State University, the first thing, you know, although I was focused on doing this and hosting it and having fun, you get anything below this or dean list, you come home. So I even looked at education in a different way. And while I was at that school, I said, how can I take this and make it national? How can I take what we're doing at Delaware State, all HBCUs, to China? And that's when I did that senior year. And so for me, leadership is about more than 4 letters, 3 letters, 10 letters. It's about a lifelong commitment to really pushing the culture forward. And so, you know, and the same thing, to me, my highest honor and what meant the most wasn't any award show I hosted. It was when I was tapped to become the youngest commencement serves as the correspondent secretary. That's legacy. These are educated Black women by Suzanne Walsh, who's the president of Bennett College, inspiring our generation now and being able to connect and reconnect and letting them know it's cool that we're setting our own path, right? It's cool that we're doing our own thing, but you got to understand somebody already paid for that. Somebody paid for the crown that you're wearing. And so we have to take it up a level and not just erase the history, but bring that with us, bring that and honor that. And so when I think about legacy, when I think about why we do it, what's our why is for everything that we want and everything that they've already paid for. We don't have a choice but to do it.
Amazing. Anyone else?
That's fire.
Yeah. I mean, look, I live very far from where I grew up. I grew up, you know, daughter of a single mom in a small town in northern Louisiana, not anywhere near New Orleans, you know, because folks are always like, oh, you're from Newark. It's like, nope. I grew up in a small rural community where all of the men in my life, you know, did time in prison. And the women in my family held it down. And so I mostly wanted to make something of myself and make my community proud. And I wanted to demonstrate that, like, that where we come from is both part of us, but it does not have to be a limit on the kinds of things that we can imagine. And for me, that was why going to an HBCU became so incredibly important. The very first day that I walked onto campus at Howard, all of the years that I had spent having Black kids in my community tell me that I wanted to be white because I was a nerdy Black girl got healed immediately, because here I was on campus with a whole bunch of nerds. And that's not to demonize the community that I come from. I came from a racially stratified community that communicated to Black children that there was no place for them in, honors and advanced classes. Like, so I have empathy and care and concern. I don't blame them, right? I understand that this is what happens when communities pull certain people out and say, you get to be the exceptional one, you get to be the chosen one, and everybody else has to struggle. And so a lot of my journey has been about, what does it mean to reject that? What does it mean to say that if we build systems that take care of everybody, then we get to see that everybody matters and everybody has a purpose and a goal and everybody is worthy of resources, care, and concern. And that shouldn't be, I'm not trying to be anybody's magical Negro. And I'm certainly not trying to be one of these kind of Negroes that like makes life comfortable for white people. And I very much think that there was a way that I could have been set up to do that. But you don't walk on the Howard's campus and then become that person. Now, look, there are some exceptions and some questionable people, but in general, if you do it right, you come to understand that you are part of this broader legacy. And then I became an activist in 2007 when 45 minutes from where I grew up down in Jena, Louisiana, some Black boys were being intimidated by a noose at a local high school, and we took a busload of kids from the institution where I did my PhD down to Jena and began to protest and began to think about these things. And that was 2 years after Hurricane Katrina. And so I began to try to have a different relationship to the criminal justice system that had, look, one of my earliest memories is going to visit my uncle in a prison. Right. And so the prison industrial complex had disrupted my life. It was the thing we did on holidays. My grandmother cooked, and then we drove down to the middle of these rural Louisiana cotton fields to take food to the men in my family who were incarcerated. And so I needed to have a more transformative relationship to the criminal justice system, to the modes of policing, to the lack of opportunity that attended to communities. And I wanted to make sure that if I was going to be one of the people in my family, in my community that made it, that as Mr. Mayor said at the beginning of this conversation, when I became mayor, we became mayor. When I eat, we eat. When I got these degrees and this access, then we got it. And it could be a thing that we were proud of. And that becomes my why, that it is always about remembering that I'm not here to impress white people. And I'm very explicit about that, right? Because we sometimes think Black excellence and Black achievement is about proving something to white people. The reality is that beyond sort of liberal white folks who are trying to do their work, there are a whole bunch of folk in this country that are not actually invested in letting Black people prove anything. So it can't be about them. It has to be about, what does freedom look like for us?
Absolutely.
So I teach with that energy. I write with that energy. I talk with that energy. And so very often, it's like, you could just be more refined. Like, you have a whole PhD. Why can't you sort of do the respectability thing, right? But it's like my grandmother, who was like a pistol-toting, shotgun-toting granny, just shows up and says, give them hell. Right?
Yes.
And so that's the energy. And look, and it's important because there's a way that when you put on these blazers and get these degrees, those things are designed to de-radicalize you, right? They are designed to like shorn you of your teeth, of your bite, and to sort of like smoothly integrate you into the system so that you can participate and you can begin to believe the hype. And our job is always to like peep game and to resist the hype. And that's kind of what my life is and why I mean.
Look, Brea, I'm in a classroom just sitting here, getting this education. I feel like you guys are educating me every now. Look, one thing I want to shift to, and I'll let you go first, Brea, because I feel like everyone has already touched on this a little bit. Like, what motivates everyone on this call to be the voice for the voiceless? And I really want to talk about like how you use your leadership platform to stand up for others. And I want you to go first because everyone kind of already touched on it. And Brittney, just go, Brea. I'm gonna let you go.
Oh my gosh. I mean, what hasn't been said? Y'all are brilliant. And I especially really resonate with what Dr. Cooper just said about some of these spaces being designed to de-radicalize us. I think when I'm in the spaces, it is my ancestors and my elders that are my why as a result. I'm always thinking of what they actually were dreaming of. And I know there's a lot of people who say like, oh, I am my ancestors' wildest dream. This moment is my ancestors' wildest dream. And I think it's important to really think about, like, is it, you know, did they dream of accolades? Did they dream of, you know, being considered Black excellent? Or did they dream of rest? Did they dream of being able to take off of work on a Saturday and not have a whip at their back? Did they dream of being able to care for and create spaces of joy for them and their loved ones? And am I actually getting closer to that, or am I just getting and it's okay for it to just be my dream, but I just don't want to lie anymore about what my ancestors actually dreamt of. And I think some of that is really easy when you're in intergenerational spaces, because your elders are telling you, listen, I'm soon going to be going on to glory, and this is what I want for the baton to be passed and for that work to be continued. And again, when I first met Mr. Belafonte, he was in his late 80s. I was a sophomore in college. I was about 19 years old. And it felt like, why are you still doing this work? And his answer was very much like, it still needs to be done. Like if I felt like my generation had done what we needed to do during the civil rights movement, I would love to be somewhere retiring, enjoying myself. But unfortunately, so many of our elders are either in exile or still in this fight. And I think that speaks to how much still needs to be done. And so who am I to be the beneficiary of all of the work that they did and not feel a sense of responsibility to continue doing that? And so that's why I do it. And as far as advocating for others, I'll be honest, my activism is very selfish. I really got into this work for myself. Like, what do I want the world to look like for a young Black queer woman? And what needs to change for me to feel safe, for me to feel like I can have ambition, for me to feel like I can bring children into this world with a good conscience. And inherently, a world that is safer for someone like me will be a world that is safer for others as well. So my selfishness then reverberates, but it really does start inward. And I think it goes outward when I'm also thinking of my own privileges. And this is where I think, D9 organizations comes back in. As a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, I'm also thinking about colorism and elitism and how we push the boundaries that some of these organizations previously existed within. And so that's really important for me, is how do I leave this organization better than I received it? And that is always something that comes up in my leadership and my community organizing is, am I settling for what someone gave to me, or am I pushing it to be better for a future generation and adapting it to future young people who deserve to be able to customize their spaces for what works best for them?
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with all your points, Bree. And I want to open up the floor to anyone else that want to talk about why, specific reasons as to why things motivate you and how you're helping the voiceless. If you guys want to talk about that before we move on.
Television, I want to jump in quick and brief. I think it was Dr. Cooper who first mentioned about, Issa and a lot of these creators, and you look at Kugler and the list goes on and on. But honestly, and I know our viewers can relate, or maybe not, I genuinely, sometimes, you look at the face, right? I'll use an example. When you look at different brands that maybe Diddy has acquired, or the face, it's a difference between face and ownership. And I assumed that we were doing our thing. I'm like, oh, Moesha, Brittney got a show. She got a doll. She's running the world. I'm thinking that because they're pushing it, because it's there, that is theirs. And in 2022, and even when I got out of college between 2015, 2016, just jumping into television, it's about more. It's about more than just being the face, being a host, having a credit. As they say, we can't get a seat at the table. We got to build our own table and assign the seats. And that's really the fight. It truly is a fight still in 2020. Although there's a lot of creatives, they would rather give you a paycheck than give you a title. They'll rather give you a paycheck than give you the ownership, and you have to fight. And I think right now, as far as the arts and as far as being visual, we have to support each other. We have to continue to extend those bridges, and really have that ownership. And so, personally, in the realm of arts, using those platforms to put these artists out, to force, and that's the word I have to use, to force these artists out, to force this talent out, to re-edit the credit. That's what I always say, because we love giving credits. And re-edit credit. And I remember senior year at Del State, I had a whole little TV series, and they thought I was crazy. It was called My Black Back. And it was like, what's that? I said, all the things in the world that was ours that somebody else took, and we taking it back. And it was the coolest, little thing, but it's a joke, but it's so true, because we don't have enough ownership. We don't have enough credit. We don't have enough executive producers, directors, creators, script writers in those rooms at that table. They may put us in front of the camera, but we have to be running the behind the scenes. And so when it comes to art, that's exactly what I try to do. Every deal now, it has to be partnerships or it's ownerships, or not only hosting the shows, but I may have 8 shows that I'm executive producing that I'm not in front of the camera. And we're putting on these producers, we're putting on these people that were blackballed, blacklisted, X'd out, cursed out, because they didn't play fair, play by the rules, really taking back our ownership. And then when I'm in front of the camera, how am I presenting myself? It can't be 2 people. Okay, I can't be doing one thing behind the scene, then I get in front of camera and I'm acting a fool for a check. I gotta come how I gotta come every single time, because we can't make a fool of us. And so, kind of like Brea said, I worry about myself. How am I looking? How am I dressing? How am I speaking? Just because I come from a certain thing, I'm not gonna act the way you want me to act or what you suggest. Certain words, I don't say that. That's not how I talk. And I have to always be professional. Always be professional and continue to move on in life and do my job. That's my favorite phrase. I'm just here to work. That's everybody. I like to work. So yeah, we just got to continue to really take that on and not say, oh well, I'm not here to raise nobody's kids. I'm not here. But you get multi-million dollars. I'm not here to be a icon. I don't want to get into that, but I believe if you're carrying the color, you got to carry that weight that comes with it and the honor and pride.
Wow. Look, I heard you say take our black back, ownership. And it's funny because I'm gonna just say 2 things and then we can kind of like answer this question: pain to power and purpose. How we take our pain and turn it into purpose and power. And I want you, and you kind of said it, Jamila. So I just want everyone to kind of just chime in and talk about those strategies and just like all the tools and resources that's needed to go from pain to power and purpose.
One of the things I want to offer is that I don't think that our people are voiceless. I think that folks don't listen. And I try to stay real clear about that because, I'm not anybody's spokesperson, right? Because look, people like to spend a lot of time on Twitter telling me how I don't speak for them, people that look like us. And so what I say is that the way that I honor our people is because I am a scholar of our histories and our work and what we are trying to do. And in my life, I try to live out a commitment to a politics that is always about loving Black people. And that is the perspective from which I speak. So I don't claim to speak for our people because that is a reduction of who our people are. We don't need racial spokespersons. We need power. We need power, we need representation, and we need the ability for folks to have the kind of choices so that they can live the kinds of lives that they want to live. That is what self-determination means. And when we reduce that to the opportunity to be a spokesperson for the people, then that's us taking the carrots that capitalism offers without actually freeing our folks. And I think that we have to stay real clear about those things, right? And so because of that, like I grew up, I too am the daughter of a preacher. I am technically a preacher. And, but I used to believe in the sort of narrative about, your misery is your ministry. There's purpose in your pain and all of that. And you know what? I'm tired of people saying that to Black folks, right? Because to me, that just means that we live in a system that continually produces painful conditions for us. And then the carrot that it holds out to us is that we can find purpose in the pain. No, my commitment is stop making Black people suffer. Stop touting how resilient we are, because when you say we are resilient, what you mean is how much can we take for them before they die? So, they take more stuff and then we survive it anyway. And they be like, look how resilient you are. That is an equation in which you just keep on lifting resources out of the community. And you don't think that we're not resilient until you've killed us. That is a necro-political, to use a fancy term for it, a perverse way of engaging Black life, and I reject it on its face. Our job is to figure out how to build a kind of structures, how to figure out how to build the kinds of worlds that allow our people to dream, to Brea's point, that allow our people to rest, right? To to Jamila's point, that allow our people to see themselves and see possibility, but also that does not continually produce suffering. That's why we fight back against the police and the way that they police in our communities. That's why we have critiques about capitalist structures and lack of ownership, right? That's why all of those structural critiques become necessary, because when you don't change the structure, then the only thing you have to offer to our folks is platitudes about how we can make our suffering purposeful. And I come from people who made suffering purposeful. I try to make suffering purposeful. So I'm not saying that us turning our pain into purpose is wrong. I admire the way in which we've been able to be something in a world that doesn't want us to survive. So I honor that. And at the same time, what I say to our people is, but we deserve so much more than that. So I'm trying to be the kind of teacher, writer, thinker, and person in the world that lives into a different kind of future than what was made available. And what I'm also trying to say to people is, we can have more than this. We are worth more than this. We don't have to accept the crumbs that white supremacy offers to us. And to sort of connected to the point of our conversation today, it is also to say, and I have that kind of audacity because I'm a student of people like Ras Baraka, of people like Amiri Baraka, of the cultural nationalist movement, of the Black Power era, that built the kind of institutions that radically reformed how our folks thought about food, healthcare, and self-defense, right? And so our job is to build the kind of institutions and the kind of worlds that help people to understand we can provide resources in different ways than what we do. And we don't have to live in worlds that are designed to produce our death, produce our struggle, produce our suffering, and then tell us that that's where character comes from. Character can also come from learning how to love your neighbor better. Character can also come from learning how to use power with purpose and not to oppress. It doesn't have to come from a system that continually produces our suffering and then champions us because we overcome it. I reject it. I
mean, it's like I want to say I reject that too, but part of that is attending HBCUs and those systematic things that pour into that. And I kind of want to shift to education and the importance of that. And Malcolm X said, "Education is a passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those that are willing to prepare for it today." So I want y'all to talk to me a little bit about, the effective, adequate, and equal education, and talk to me a little bit about your experience on HBCU campuses. I know we touched on it a lot, but I definitely want to hear from you.
Well, I want to say, I'm trying to put those two questions together. My father said that the noblest function of art is to oppose what is ugly. And so, our quest really in this whole pain thing that we keep talking about is to really oppose suffering and the greatest enemy of all, death, right? How do we oppose these things and people who are trying to kill us? And our artist design should be designed to do that, to keep us alive and healthy and well, and have our imagination become radical. My frat brother, Dr. Cornel West, talks about a radical imagination that I've adopted and used everywhere I go. In my own tongue, that we have to have a radical imagination. The first thing that slavery does to you is steal your imagination. You can't imagine a place better than where you are or what's going on now. You have to imagine something different that exists, a system that's completely different than the one we have, places that you've never been. And imaginations are developed, fostered, and fed through the right kind of education. Right? The wrong type of education kills your imagination. It turns your question marks into periods, right? It makes you believe that what you see now is all that you're going to get and all that you have. It puts boundaries around you and makes you believe there's no other place than here, right? That this is where we're going to be. This is for me, and nothing else is mine, right? You walk through cities that you live in, that your family's been in for generations, and you think that the things that are good belong to everybody else, and only the things that are terrible belong to you, right? You don't take ownership of none of this stuff. You don't, you're not confident or demanding, or you don't feel like when things are created, that these things are created for your benefit, right? Or that you can create things on your own, that you have to always seek out other people's tables and not create a table of your own. I think the right kind of education gives you that kind of confidence. Same confidence I got at Howard University. I knew, and I think my friends knew when they left Howard, that they were going to do something. I was there with Puffy. I was there with Kasim Reed, who became the mayor of Atlanta. I was there with a whole bunch of people who I argued with and fought with in college, and Drew Hall and Meridian Hill and all these places. And they went out to wherever they went and did whatever they thought they wanted to do. They painted the world, like they wanted to paint it, and dared people to talk about it. And I think that kind of confidence is the confidence we have to give to our babies in the middle of all of this stuff, that you have to give them the confidence to speak up, to resist, to build your own thing, that it's okay to build your own thing, to create your own space, to do what it is that you need to do, and to have that impact the world and prayerfully transform it. So that's the kind of radical imagination that we need. And as a principal and educator, I try to do that, feed people's imagination so they can imagine a place better than the one they have been forced to be in all of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I mean, I love that so much. And I just want to jump in because though I have the honor of being a part of a Divine Nine organization, I went to a predominantly white, predominantly wealthy institution called Yale University. And it almost gave me the inverse feeling, but I still arrived at the same place where I had grown up in a predominantly Black and brown community. So that was my culture shock. I had never been around whiteness before in that way. And I got to Yale and was like, oh, I thought I was middle class. And now I'm here and seeing how much this university is hoarding, how much the families of my peers are hoarding, to see how you are grooming us to go on and take over the world in a very literal way. And it's not something that I want to be a part of. And it actually radicalized me in a deep way. My mom jokes all the time. We sent her to Yale to be a doctor and she came back a Black Panther. We don't know what happened. But I truly believe that seeing that around me made me want to make an about face and say, I don't want to be what this institution is grooming me to be. I want to be its worst nightmare, as a matter of fact. And I want to shift all of the, I want to shift the resources that is hoarded there. Yale has an endowment that is worth $43 billion. $43 billion sitting in an investment portfolio while this country tells us they don't have money for healthcare, for housing, to transform policing, to invest in communities, while the city of New Haven that it sits in and the state of Connecticut deal with so many things. And so it very much radicalized me and said, no, the money is there. It's just sitting in an investment fund. And y'all believe we can't touch that. And I believe that we can. And so I think that was something that really shifted for me. But, I'm the oldest sister. And I think my sisters kind of looked up at me and said, ooh, that Ivy League isn't all it's cracked up to be. They both went to HBCUs, Hampton and Howard. We got the HB rivalry going on in the house. And it's been beautiful to see their experiences and HBCUs through their eyes and to sort of know what I want to invest my energy into now.
Wonderful.
Please, Dr. Cooper.
Oh, I was going to tell just a quick story. My very first class at Howard, I walk in, the professor puts down a map of the world. But it don't look like any map I've ever seen because Africa is huge on this map.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, this is a map drawn to scale. And so you just have, like 20 Black kids sitting in the room going, what do you mean? That's not the size of Africa. Why is Africa so big on this map? And he was like, this map is accurately drawn to scale. And so then he just says, now, why do you think that you grew up with maps in which Africa was not drawn to scale? And it's like a simple intervention, and yet it's like a world-changing intervention. I mean, he just put the map down and asked the question. I was like, oh my God, this is why I'm here. What do you mean? Why haven't people? You see what I'm saying? That's what happens on Black college campuses. Is that a professor can walk in the room, that professor looks like you, you're in a room full of children that look like you, and all of a sudden you recognize through a simple intervention that the world is not as you thought that it was.
That's right.
And all of a sudden, a whole other set of things becomes possible. Now you recognize that maps are political objects, right? That's something our people have always known. We think about electoral college maps that we fighting over all over the country, but it puts that in stark relief. That story for me is iconic of what Howard meant to me. as a kid who was battling the anti-Blackness that had been fed to me by my own school system, as I spoke about earlier. And so just that one intervention has stuck with me nearly 25 years since it happened. It's the kind of teacher that I strive to be. And it's the kind of education that I hope that every kid that steps onto one of these campuses have. And I hope that folks also recognize, right, even though HBCUs are like having their moment, you know, and folks are talking about them and thinking about them and all of that, HBCUs are, we don't just need to think about the elite HBCUs like your Howards and your Spelmans. I love Howard. I will fight you over Howard. I will put you out of my house if you talk ish to me about Howard. I want to be clear, and I will talk all the ish and I will put you out. At the same time, though, HBCUs take the kids that every other institution said didn't have any value, and we can do for those students in 4 to 5 years what these other institutions cannot do and have not managed to do from K through 12. And that's also the value of HBCUs, that we don't see a person that is remedial and has no value and can be educated. We see somebody who simply needs a shot and needs a professor that's going to get in their behind and be like, why you wasn't in class? Why you didn't do the reading? Baby, do you need help getting the book, right? Whatever, all of those sorts of things that happen in the sociality of HBCUs are the things that make the difference. And so you ain't got to just look at the real expensive elitist ones like Howard. You know, I love Howard, but it ain't got to just be about Howard. It can be about all of these public HBCUs too, because places are doing mighty work and they are turning out mighty leaders, because what we're not trying to reproduce is this kind of culture of elitism in Black communities, you know. And when you go to Howard, the thing is, you also go to Howard and you walk on that campus and you feel like, oh, we're supposed to run the world. And the thing is, you look up 20 years later and your friends and y'all are running your little corners of the world. That too can be problematic, because what we want to create is a culture in which folks feel like they can get educational resources so that they can live and thrive in their lives. That's what this has to be about, not about the ability to dominate each other.
And I got to jump in because you said you were a pastor and the spirit came upon me. Okay? I've always been an artist, you know, as creators, if you understand, then you understand, you know, it wasn't my fault. I could be in class. I could be trying to focus. You know, I was an honor roll student when it came to history and literature. Math, I wasn't strong. You know, for me, I was always it was a burning desire. I was acting. I was doing television shows when I was younger. But education, you know, versus my sister, she was top of the class. You know, she went off to Spelman. But even I noticed very young, I didn't understand. They said, you're so smart. You have to go to a PWI. They weren't pushing the top of the top at schools. You know, that 10%, that 5%, you were the one going to a PWI. You weren't viewed, you know, you weren't pushed to go to a HBCU. She ended up going to Spelman. My dad went to Morgan. My mom went to Hampton. I barely went to no school. And when you talk about, you know, getting into schools and being accepted, you know, it's hard for students to not only get into school, but to perform well, to be a part of SGA, to become a miss, and then to go on. And we're not talking about it. Yes, you know, we're talking about the popularity of HBCUs, you know, after some of the tragic passings of young Black brothers, but we really talk about HBCUs, the popularity, and how we diminish within our own culture. You know, if you're super smart, you're African American, you should be going to a PWI. A lot of people said, Jamila, why are you going to a HBCU? Or they don't know what an HBCU is, or they said, you know, I heard about it, or I want to do my undergrad at a PWI, and then I'm gonna come back and get my master's from my HBCU. But I don't want to go into that. But I will say, when it comes to HBCUs, although it looks like we're lit, it's still a fight. You know, one way, even on my radio show, my television show, one conversation I sparked, and when you talk about athletics and how much money you know, the athletic department brings in, and we continue to talk about the top prospects, young Black men. We need to commit to HBCUs. The top scholars, we need to commit to HBCUs. The top creatives, we need to commit to HBCUs. But the fight doesn't stop there. When I graduated a year after, and I'm hustling, I'm in New York, I'm at BET. I mean, I'm hustling just to create this name, to create this legacy. When a lot of people laugh, it was like, where's Delaware? What is a Miss HB? And these are people who look like me, who are creators in a space, you know, with this. So that kind of threw me off. I'm like, I thought we all, you know, even if you don't go to a HBCU, it's just, you know, come on. It's, you know, it's us. But it wasn't that. And so I said, you know what? I sat down, I wrote my book. I said, from HBCU to Hollywood, because I also realized that I graduated, you can consider the top of HBCUs and popularity or stats or whatever you want to call it, but it's not a lot of opportunities for HBCU students when they graduate right now. And it's been a fight. I can tell you, DMs, messages when I'm on tour. So I said out of pocket, starting 2016, 17, as soon as I got out of school, I would take 3 months off of work and I would go to at least 10 schools. And I would give them the real. I had to have a real conversation and equip them, because by the time you graduate, it's too late. Or you're looking at one example, a Chadwick Boseman, a Diddy, or you're going down, and even like Dr. Cooper said, we got Elizabeth State, you got Fayetteville, the list goes on. North Carolina, over 12 schools. Atlanta is not just about Clark, or excuse me, about Morehouse, about Spelman. You got Clark, you got Alabama. It's a lot of HBCUs that aren't getting the nurture and the care, and these students are not coming out with jobs. So we have to reinvest and continue to invest and not ride the hype train. I think Dr. Cooper said the hype train or the mayor, and really talk about how we're going to help them and continue that, and not just take the white dollar, but we have to start giving back and start donating to HBCUs that you didn't even go to. And so that's really it's an ongoing fight. It's an everyday fight. And students, they need these jobs, because HBCU students, they're coming out and they do not have jobs, especially in roles that are creative. They're really struggling. And they feel like, it's all about popularity, but no one really cares. Or when people talk about HBCUs, they're just talking, and alums aren't coming back, and people aren't doing things, So that's just my standpoint on HBCUs. A lot of great stuff, but there's a lot of great work to be done, and we have to start honoring HBCUs as a first priority. Not something that's popular or something that your mom might do, or such and such got letters, you want to go there. But we got to start looking at HBCUs as a cream of the crop.
I mean, the call to action is real. I just want to say that I hear it, and being an advocate at HBCUs, it's so funny. I try to wear HBCU something and everything. I try to go and educate. Like, I get it. And it's funny because even when I think of all the wonderful work you guys are doing, I try to think of like what's at the core value that we all can share. And when I think of what love means to me, and not just my love for HBCUs, but just my love for Black people, I realize that is the central vocal point, or the central heartbeat, or whatever you want to call it, for you guys' passion and enthusiasm for all the work that you guys are doing. So if you can kind of like just explain to like our viewers and everyone that's going to watch this video, like, how does love show up in everything you guys do?
I think each of the people on this panel right now are people who treat the work they do as labors of love, first and foremost. And I think part of that is because if you were doing it for any other reason, it's like, it's not the most lucrative work that you could be doing, right? It's not the least controversial work. It's not the safest work to do. You're going to go up against a lot of pushback, especially if you're doing the work that Mayor Baraka is doing, and you're in politics and you're really championing certain policy mandates and things of that nature, and really being bold and having a radical imagination. It's not easy to do. And so you only do it because you love the people you're doing it for. You love the young people coming behind you, the elders who paved the way for you. And so that love is in every part of it. And I wanted to stay that way because I think that's how it remains pure. I think there is a moment we're in where, influencers of any kind, political influencers, social media influencers, whatever, are being able to build really beautiful careers. And I think it's important for people to be compensated for their work. But I think when you're doing it for anything but the love of it, it is easy to be sidetracked from your purpose and what you're actually here to do. And so to the point that Dr. Cooper made about not being defamed by these spaces and not jumping at the carrots that they give you, we have to focus on that love and really remember what the fight is about, what we want to say we left behind when we are no longer here. And I think that's what each of y'all are doing. I'm so honored to be on this panel with you and to continue to follow the work that you're doing and to see that love exuded in every aspect of your careers.
Wonderful. Anyone else wanted to go ahead?
James Baldwin said, "Love is a battle, love is a war, love is a growing up." And I think that that's a rigorous call to recognize what loving our people looks like. It's not some, pie in the sky kind of like, I just love Black people. Now, look, I do just love Black people. And at the same time, I know that love is about the willingness to get in the fight. Love is about the willingness to stay even when it gets hard. I mentioned earlier that like I get a lot of Twitter pushback. I get a lot of Black folks who tell me all the things that they don't think that I'm doing right. And love is the ability to hear that kind of criticism and keep showing up. I'm sure Mayor Baraka knows what it means to have to deal with the criticism of the people and to keep on showing up, sort of resolved in one's purpose, and to recognize that that's also part of the work, that loving our people means recognizing their right to dissent and recognizing that everybody's not going to like you. And so in the work that I'm doing now, I'm thinking very much about what does it mean for us to love each other in ways that don't cause harm, in ways that are not about a kind of toxicity, a kind of jockeying for position, but really is about a committed investment in the well-being of all of us. And I think that's real hard work to do, but I also think that love looks like destroying white supremacy and destroying patriarchy and destroying homophobic and transphobic systems. Love is not just about our individual sort of belief in each other person to person, but it's really about recognizing that you can't, it's Cornel West, right? Justice is what love looks like in public. And so I'm hoping that we will recognize that love is a political act as much as it is a personal act. And that means that we have to vote and then vote in ways, and we have to organize in ways, and we have to teach in ways that create the possibility for Black thriving.
Wonderful. Mayor Baraka, you want to talk about love a little bit?
Well, I actually think Dr. Cooper really said it all, actually. But at the end of the day, I think our love of community, I think is in that concept, the love of community, love of people, love of humanity, of justice, of democracy, those kind of wide-ranging kind of love of these things helps you to continue to fight and struggle and do the things that you need to do. And ultimately, at the base of that is love of self, right? And love of self in a way, especially in a form of resistance. And I have a poem where I say we smile just to resist, right? So our ability to love ourselves in a place that has been designed to force us to hate each other and hate ourselves, to destroy us, is also resistance. To be present anyway, to be together anyway, to be in spaces that is difficult for us to be in anyway. I think those are the kind of sentiments that we have, and I think if we have a greater sense of love for our community and for these kind of principles, that even helps us personally. To begin to challenge the things that makes us equate love with the kind of negative stuff that people call love, but really is not, right? And Maya Angelou said, and I heard her say I think it was a funeral for her son, somebody who had passed, and she said that love is the only value that helps you to I don't want to say it wrong. When I get it right, I'll bring it back. But at the end of the day, what was being said was that if you don't love yourself, if you don't have love, you can't even accomplish all the other things that you want to accomplish, right? Because that has to be done from a place of love. Because if you don't love, then why would you do all of this other stuff anyway? Right? Why would you put yourself in these situations? Why are you fighting anyway if you don't love anything or anybody? I mean, if love is not there, you might as well accept everything that's being done to you.
That's right.
I completely agree. I think love is the first step to trying to attempt to make a difference in your community. And, we are the change that we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. We are the heroes that have the power to make a difference in our communities. So I want you guys to tell all the viewers any specific steps that they can take to make a difference specifically in their community. And I know it starts with love.
Well, I would tell people to get involved right now, that there is no starting age or time when you should engage. You should engage today. And if there's nothing that you want to be a part of, Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, you say organize, organize, organize. If there's nothing you want to be a part of, then create something yourself and be a part of that, right? So I would say find what you love immediately and engage in that, like right away, whatever like impacts you or makes you, feel like you need to be involved. I will begin to organize and create around those spaces. And there are a lot of people who need help, especially they need voices of young folks involved in it. That's missing in a lot of areas and a lot of spaces, and folks need to get in those spaces and force your way in. And sometimes forcing your way in means to create your own place so other people can invite you in, right? Or you invite them in. How about that? So start now, I would say.
Yes. And to build upon that, especially the organize, I would say organize locally too. I think a lot of people are looking to change the world and are bypassing their corner of the world that they can have the biggest impact in and the most immediate impact in. And I think local organizing is what really needs to be an investment and invested in because it is where you most intimately know your community. It is where you can really be a part of canvassing and touching other people to be a part of that. And so I know there are so many local organizers who don't get nearly the media attention, the funding support as national organizations do. And so your donation, your investment of time goes so much longer with them. And so I would say find a local organization that is organizing around Black liberation, that is organizing around economic justice, that is organizing around whatever that issue is that you have love for. And if that doesn't exist, to Mayor Baraka's point, then start it yourself. But I know, especially for those who are tuning in and are on campuses or are about to be on campuses, there are so many Black student unions and Black student associations and NAACP chapters and Black Lives Matter chapters and whatever the case may be, and find that space, make it your own, and be a part of really transforming your community first, and then allowing that to continue to snowball.
Wow. Jamila?
To me, do the work, do the background. A lot of young youth, Gen Z, really excited, millennials, they're excited, and they have these great plans. They have these great ideas of change, but sometimes it's easy to get influenced when you don't know who you are. Sometimes you got to sit where you are right now, and it could take a year, it could take 6 months, it could take 2 years, but have your vision, distinguish your vision, write down your personal principles. Who are you? For me, when it talks about God, when it talks about love and a plan, I'm rooted in God. So when you're rooted in God, and when you're being used by God, and when you surrender your power to God, it's gonna be love. So to me, decide who you are to, create that path. If this deal ever happened, right? If someone wanted to buy my company for $1 million, you have to decide, what will be the terms before you get there. And so to me, is do the work. A lot of times, Gen Z and millennials, we are skipping doing the work, doing the research, kind of creating our personal foundation. Like Brea said, before you want to conquer the world, you got to know who you are. You got to get this right. And you got to know that when you pop out there as a disruptive innovator, they will come to you. When you create that platform, they will come to you. But if your soul isn't ready, if you're not ready, you can't take over the world. So just fall back and do the inner work, and you're going to be good.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And thanks to all our participants for tonight's roundtable. Special shout out to Audible and HBCU Buzz for hosting this conversation. Head over to audible.com and check out Mayor Baraka's new Audible original, The Book of Baraka, today.